Hi, I'm Seraphine, and 2 months ago, I showed up to a family party with a gift and left with the last piece of my dignity. My sister opened the door, glanced at my clothes, and said, "This party's not for you." But it wasn't just a door closing, it was a script they'd been writing for years. One where I was invisible, uninvited, edited out of photos, inheritance, even memories. How do you fight back when your own family erases you? Politely. Do you burn it all down, or do you mail them the invoice? The air had a particular chill that morning, not because of the weather, but because of what I knew was waiting on the other side of that door. Savannah, in late November, carried a quiet sort of cold, not bitter, just honest. I held a gift bag in my hand, wrapped with gold tissue paper I had ironed the night before. The edges were sharp, the corners folded just right. It was supposed to mean something. I had debated for days whether I should even come. But this was family. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. So I parked across the street, took a long breath, and crossed the familiar driveway. The scent of pine mulch and rosemary hit me like déjà vu. My sister always had a knack for dressing things up for the holidays. When the door finally opened, Callista didn't say hello. She didn't smile. She just looked at me. No, she scanned me. Top to bottom. Her eyes stopped briefly at my scarf, a deep navy wool, probably too plain for the occasion. I caught the flick of her eyebrow before the words came out, sharp and low, like she was reciting a line she had practiced in the mirror. "This party's not for you." That was it. Not, "Hey, glad you made it." Not, "Come in, it's been a while." Just that. I waited, frozen. I half expected a laugh, a backpedal, something, but no one behind her looked up for their drinks. The clinking of glasses and muffled laughter continued as if I didn't exist. She didn't step aside. The door stayed half open, like a gap in a fence just wide enough to see what you're missing. I nodded once. That's all. And for a second, I thought I'd leave the gift right there on the porch, some quiet act of grace. But as I bent down to place it near her feet, something inside me shifted. There was a time, not too long ago, when they forgot to include me in a family photo. "Oh, you weren't around," they said, but I was, just upstairs, folding napkins. I didn't argue then. This time, I picked the gift back up. No, this wasn't for them anymore. I walked down the steps, each one feeling lighter than the last. Behind me, the door clicked shut. Not slammed. Just final. A polite kind of erasure. The leaves crunched under my boots as I made my way back to the car. Gold and brown and rust. They didn't try to stay on the trees either. They let go when it was time. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just drove. 10 minutes later, I pulled into the gas station near Habersham. I wasn't out of fuel, just needed a pause. A reset. As I sat there, phone in my lap, I opened Facebook out of habit. That's when I saw it. A friend had tagged me in a photo from the party. The caption read, "Beautiful night with the best people." I wasn't in the shot, no surprise. But it was the comments that froze me. "Great event, Callista. The table settings were amazing." "Loved the seating chart. So organized." I tapped on the image, zoomed in. There it was. The seating chart, handwritten in calligraphy. Every cousin, every aunt, every +1, but no Seraphine. They never planned for me to be there. Not even on paper. It wasn't an accident. It was the plan. I sat in my car, gift bag still beside me, untouched. The gold tissue paper had started to slump, and I felt something inside me shift again. Not a break, not a crack. More like a door quietly closing behind me. Not theirs. Mine. I didn't go back inside. I didn't even sit down. I opened the closet and pulled the old binder of home repair receipts. But instead of flipping through them, I just stood there, holding it to my chest like it might still have warmth from those years I thought we were building something together. The apartment was quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't soothe you. It echoed. The gift bag from yesterday sat where I'd dropped it, still sealed, still ridiculous in its optimism. I'd spent hours picking out that set of glass ornaments, thinking they'd match Callista's taste. Turns out, nothing I ever touched matched anymore. I poured myself some coffee I didn't really want and sat by the window, watching condensation streak down the pane. Outside, kids were walking to school, their laughter sharp and bright. Inside, it felt like grief had pulled the air from the room. "There's a kind of grief," I whispered, not even realizing I was talking out loud, "when you're erased from a memory while still being alive." To distract myself, I opened Facebook. A mistake, but a habitual one. The party photos had started to flood in overnight. Callista had already posted a carousel. Perfect lighting, rented lanterns glowing behind everyone's shoulders, soft jazz in the background. It was curated to look effortless. That was always her skill, pretending nothing took effort, least of all kindness. Then I saw it. One photo in particular froze me. A group shot in front of the old house. Our house. The porch had been polished. The same railing I repainted during the hurricane recovery 3 years ago gleamed under the floodlights. Callista stood front and center, of course, arms linked with cousins who hadn't visited Dad in the hospital once. That house wasn't just a venue. It was my inheritance too. It was my history. They held the party there without telling me. That wasn't just exclusion. It was a statement that I no longer belonged, even to the places I helped save. I felt it in my jaw, in the way I set the phone down too gently, like I might throw it otherwise. My hands trembled, but it wasn't sadness anymore. It was recognition. The buzz of my phone broke the moment. Vera's name flashed across the screen. I answered on the first ring. "Did you see the photos?" she asked, no preamble. "I did." She hesitated, then added, "There wasn't a place card for you, Seraphine. I asked. They didn't just forget. You weren't on the list." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "Of course I wasn't." "And Callista," she continued, her voice lowering, "she told people you probably wouldn't come, that you tend to be unpredictable. I'm sorry, but..." She spun the narrative early. "They didn't just forget me," I said slowly. "They wrote a version of reality where I never existed." Vera didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Silence from an ally was different. It made space, not absence. I hung up and grabbed my coat. The air outside was crisp and dry, carrying that clean kind of chill that makes you feel more awake than you want to be. I walked down to Forsyth Park without a plan, just needing to move. On the bench near the fountain, I sat with my hands folded and stared at the bare trees. Flashbacks came uninvited. Me sanding down the porch steps in shorts and an old t-shirt, sweat dripping into my eyes. Dad handing me lemonade with that crooked smile he saved for when he was proud. And now, those same steps were just a backdrop for someone else's story. Callista hadn't just used the house, she'd staged it like a set. We weren't a family anymore. We were a PR campaign with matching outfits and selective memory. And here I was, the part they cropped out. I stood slowly, my bones aching in a way that had nothing to do with age. As I made my way home, I passed by a bookstore with a chalkboard sign that read, "Tell the story they tried to silence." I stopped, read it twice, then walked on. If they were willing to use the house without telling me, I had to ask, what else had they taken that once belonged to me? The notebook was old, but every date inside still burned like it happened yesterday. I didn't need to read much. I remembered every line, every receipt, every moment I had logged. But still, I sat down with it like it was a novel someone else had written about a life that somehow still belonged to me. That evening, the apartment lights were low, casting long shadows across the room. I had my laptop open on the coffee table. A notification popped up. A new video post from Callista's business page. I clicked it without thinking, without guarding my heart. That was my mistake. There she was, standing on the steps of the house I once called home, framed in soft candlelight and fake humility. "A heartfelt thanks to everyone who helped build this beautiful night," she began, voice smooth, media polished. It truly wouldn't have been the same without you. And then the list started. Aunt May for the floral arrangements, Uncle Lou for keeping the energy light, Rebecca, a third cousin's wife, for helping with the drinks. Even her assistant got a shout-out. But not me. Not even a passing mention. Not a blink of acknowledgement. My name was skipped like it had never been part of the vocabulary to begin with. When they thank everyone but you, I murmured to myself, it's not an oversight, it's intention. It hurt more than I expected, and maybe I should have seen it coming. But watching it unfold in front of me, hearing her twist that knife while smiling into a camera, it hit bone. Then came the part that made my stomach tighten. She was wrapping up, speaking softly now, holding a wine glass like it was part of the costume. My father used to say I was the one who held this family together. I sat completely still. That wasn't what he said. That wasn't what happened. 1 year ago, almost to the day, I sat with our father on that porch. He was thin then, breath shallow, skin papery. I held his hand while he whispered through the morphine fog. You were the one who stayed, he told me. When everyone else had a reason to leave, you stayed. Callista wasn't even in town that month. She sent flowers. She posted an old photo captioned, "Forever Daddy's girl." But I was the one holding the basin when he couldn't sit up. I was the one washing his sheets and heating his soup. And now she stood on those same steps, wearing a smile borrowed from empathy, and claimed his final words for herself like they were heirlooms. I paused the video and picked up my phone. Did you watch it? Vera's voice came through before I could speak. I did. She wasn't there when he said it, Seraphine. I was. I remember. She didn't even come back until after the funeral. I nodded, staring at the frozen frame on my screen. She's rewriting the script. History belongs to whoever speaks the loudest, Vera said gently, but that doesn't make it true. I closed my laptop. My hands were steady now. I pulled the spiral-bound notebook from the drawer, the one I hadn't touched since the funeral. Its cover was worn, corners bent, but the inside was clean, deliberate. Receipts taped down, notes in margins, lists of expenses, hospital visits, calls I made, a whole section labeled Home Repairs, 2017. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about accuracy. Callista had assumed silence meant surrender, that my lack of reaction gave her license to rewrite everything in her favor. But I wasn't preparing a fight. I was building a record. Truth doesn't always scream. Sometimes it waits. Patient, documented. And I had documented everything. They wrote a story without me. I was about to hand them the ending they never expected. The letter stayed folded, but the decision did not. By late afternoon, I found myself scrolling through videos again, not because I wanted to revisit the damage, but because something inside me needed confirmation, needed to see with my own eyes what I already felt in my gut. I watched a clip from the party again, one that Callista had posted as a highlight reel. There were the usual smiles, clinks of glasses, people twirling in carefully chosen outfits like it was some kind of suburban gala. Then I saw her, my mother, standing just behind Callista, a flute of champagne in hand. Not smiling, not frowning. Just present. Watching. Not once did she interrupt when someone near her made a joke about me being so unpredictable lately. She didn't correct them. She didn't defend me. She didn't even blink. That stung in a place I couldn't name. Because when your enemies insult you, you brace for it. But when your mother doesn't say a word on your behalf, doesn't even flinch, that kind of silence reshapes your spine. It tells you where the lines have been drawn, and who held the chalk. She didn't laugh. She didn't react. She just watched. And that hurt more than anything else. I closed the video and opened my voicemail app. There was a message I hadn't deleted, one I had ignored out of habit. I pressed play. Her voice came through, gentle but clipped. Please don't escalate things, she had said, 6 months ago during another spat with Callista. You know how your sister gets. Just stay quiet, Seraphine. It's not worth it. I played it again, This time, I didn't tear up. I just sat there, letting her voice, that soft, practiced diplomacy, fill the space I used to reserve for hope. All my life, silence had been pitched to me like it was virtue, like keeping the peace was noble, like shrinking was strength. But the truth is, silence was also a way to ignore injustice without getting your hands dirty. I walked over to the corkboard above my kitchen counter. A photo of her, from Mother's Day 3 years ago, smiled back at me. I pulled it off gently, slipped it into an envelope, and placed it inside the drawer where I kept things I didn't need, but wasn't quite ready to throw away. This wasn't spite. This was survival. I sat at the kitchen table, grabbed a notepad, and started writing a letter I never intended to send. I wrote without filter. The words came like breath, honest, rhythmic, unflinching. "I'm not cutting you off," I wrote. "I'm cutting myself free." Half an hour later, the sun had dipped low enough to cast amber across the windows. I stood to stretch and caught sight of myself in the reflection. I didn't look angry. I looked clean, lighter, like I'd set something heavy down and could finally look up. That evening, I took a slow walk through the neighborhood. I passed the corner grocery where she used to take us when we were kids, bribing us with candy if we behaved. And I remembered her favorite line whenever Callista picked on me growing up. "Don't rise to it, Seraphine. Be the bigger person." And every time I did, I swallowed hurt so often it became a reflex. Callista would snap, and I'd get scolded for provoking. She'd lie, and I'd get told to let it go. I wasn't the favorite. I was the designated peacekeeper, the family's emotional mop. But mops don't get thanked. They just get wrung out and hung up when the mess is cleaned. This wasn't about the party anymore. It was about decades of quiet erasure disguised as good manners. As I passed a church with its doors still open, a verse from my childhood Sunday school came back to me. "Let your yes be yes, and your no be no." I had been saying maybe my whole life. Maybe it'll get better. Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe it was over. If silence made me invisible, then maybe it was time to make some noise. And that's when I remembered the binder in the closet, the one with every bill I paid. But before I could get up, my phone buzzed. A message from Vera popped up on my screen. "You need to see what they posted. Now." I didn't want to look. But I did. It was a Facebook post shared by one of Callista's friends, the type who married into the family and tried too hard to be accepted. There it was. A close-up photo of the gift bag I had left outside Callista's front door. The caption underneath stung harder than I expected. "Some people just don't get it. Dollar store vibes at a champagne party." That bag had held hand-blown glass ornaments, wrapped in linen I had pressed myself. The kind of thing you give when you care, not when you want credit. But to them, it was a punchline. A symbol of how easy I was to humiliate, of how little I belonged. It wasn't just mockery, it was public dissection. They turned kindness into comedy. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just stared at it, then hit screenshot. Twice. I saved it in a folder labeled receipt box. A new one, but already filling fast. Then I kept scrolling. Another photo, this time inside the house. The hallway, a wide shot. I saw the frame before I even saw the faces. There used to be a photo there, one I had taken of our whole family back in 2015. Dad was smiling, which was rare. I had printed it, framed it, even paid for the matting myself. Now it was gone. In its place, a new photo taken at the party. Everyone posed, lit like a Hallmark catalog, and I wasn't in it. They didn't just update the frame. They edited the narrative, as if I was never part of it. I walked to the mirror in my hallway, not to fix my hair, just to look at myself. Really look. "You're not invisible," I said out loud, my voice steady. "You're just inconvenient to their fiction." After a moment, I turned and walked to the closet. I pulled down the old external hard drive, the one I hadn't touched in years. I plugged it in, waited for the hum, and opened the folder labeled Home Reno, Dad's House. There they were, date-stamped photos. Me scraping old wallpaper. Me and Dad repainting the living room. Me holding up new curtains with safety pins because the rod hadn't arrived yet. I printed the one where I stood next to Dad, both of us smiling like we'd done something monumental. And we had. We had brought that house back to life. They post. I preserve. They curate. I remember. I slipped the print into my wallet, behind my ID. I wasn't planning to show it yet, but I needed it close. Not as proof for them, but as reminder for me. Then I went back to that Facebook post. I didn't draft a long essay, no rant, no defense, just one sentence in the comment box below the photo of my gift. Sometimes the gift isn't for the party. It's a reminder of who didn't need an invitation to give. The replies came fast. Some laughed, others said nothing. A few heart-reacted. One aunt replied with a single red heart, which was her way of picking sides without saying so. Then the post disappeared. Callista deleted it. It was a small act, and I didn't cheer for it. But it was the first time I spoke up, out loud, where they could all see. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I just used my voice. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the binder again. I hadn't opened it yet, but I would. If they want to repaint history, I've got receipts. Literal ones. Truth wasn't loud. It just needed a signature. I placed the binder on the kitchen table, still slightly dusty from being wedged between paint cans and tax forms. I had labeled it myself back in 2017, House Repairs in sharp black ink. The cover had yellowed with time, corners curled, but the contents inside? Immaculate, organized, undeniable. I turned page by page, each taped receipt whispering a version of the story they tried to erase. Roof repair, electrical rewiring, porch restoration, all of it under my name. Dated, signed, paid. Some of the receipts bore the same contractor's signature Callista had recently praised online for bringing our family home back to life. I stared at it for a long moment, fingers tightening around the page. I didn't need to scream. I just needed ink on paper and a date stamp. My laptop was still open from the night before. I pulled up my email, typing slow at first, then faster, attaching photos of receipts, scanned contracts, email confirmations. I drafted a message to both my mother and Callista, each line factual, calm, impossible to twist. But I didn't send it. They didn't deserve the explanation. Not yet. But I deserved the clarity. I opened Google Drive, created a new folder titled Truth E for later, and uploaded everything. Every line item, every signed check, every before and after photo they conveniently cropped me out of. I wanted to feel satisfied, but it wasn't satisfaction that sat in my chest. It was precision. Clean. Focused. That evening, just before sunset, I walked down to a local print shop 2 blocks from my apartment. The air was cold, sharp enough to sting if you breathed too deep. I handed over a USB and asked the clerk to print 5 copies of a specific invoice. The one for the foundation repair I paid for with my savings after Dad's stroke. It was over $6,800. I hadn't told anyone, not even Vera. "Do you want them in envelopes?" the clerk asked. "Yes," I said, "and I'll write the notes myself." I walked home with them in a canvas bag. At the kitchen table, I slipped the papers into 5 manila envelopes. In one, I added a handwritten note. "You don't owe me anything, but you don't get to pretend I owed you either." The next morning, I mailed them. No return address, no fanfare. One to Callista, one to my mother, one to Aunt Clara, the keeper of family gossip, one to the family's estate attorney, and one to myself. Vera came over later that afternoon. She spotted the empty envelope stack and didn't ask. Instead, she sat across from me, quietly sipping tea, her fingers tracing the edges of a coaster I'd made during a DIY phase I never shared with anyone else. "You built that house twice," she finally said. "First with your hands, then with your silence." I nodded. There wasn't much else to say. Later that night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, not thinking about revenge, or exposure, or even fairness. Just Finality. They could delete posts. They could change stories. But they couldn't delete ink. My silence wasn't weakness. It was reconnaissance. I had just finished organizing the last folder in my Truth for Naught, for later drive, when the alert buzzed on my phone. I assumed it was another useless coupon or a weather warning. Instead, it read, "You are no longer a member of the group family circle." I stared at it, blinked, read it again. The group had been around for over 6 years, created after our dad's first health scare. We used it to share photos, arrange hospital transport, update people on medications and schedules. I was the one who uploaded every flyer for potlucks, tracked birthdays, posted the casserole chart when Uncle Lou broke his hip. No warning, no explanation, no goodbyes, just deleted. I wasn't just removed from a conversation, I said out loud to the empty room. I was excommunicated in silence. Out of instinct, I opened my screenshots folder. I'd saved posts from that group before, mostly out of habit. One image stopped me cold, a comment under one of Callista's old posts. "She's always so dramatic. Don't feed the fire." There it was, the justification, the excuse, the version of me they'd curated so they wouldn't have to deal with the real one. I didn't know whether to scream or laugh. Instead, I set the phone down and paced the living room once, twice. By the third turn, a new message popped up from Vera. "You need to see this." I opened it. It was a screenshot of a private group chat. Not just the family group. This was the real one. The one behind the curtain. There was Callista, in plain text. "Just let her come. She'll feel out of place and leave. Don't need to tell her no." A second voice chimed in. One of the cousin's wives, I think. "It'll be fun. She'll embarrass herself in that dress again." I sat down slowly, phone still glowing in my hand. So, it hadn't been a moment of pettiness at the door. It was a plan. My humiliation wasn't a side effect. It was the point. They set me up like an amateur villain in a bad high school movie. Except we were adults, grown women with jobs and taxes and children. And this was how they spent their time? I stared at the screen. My hand trembled just once, then stilled. I started to type a reply to Vera. Then I deleted it. I wasn't going to give them what they wanted. Not a meltdown, not a counterattack. If they wanted me to burn, they'd have to do it without my match. Instead, I opened my laptop and created a new folder. They thought I'd stay quiet. Inside, I began dragging screenshots. Every tagged insult, every smirking emoji, every time my name had been twisted into a punchline. I didn't care about their digital whisper network anymore. I cared about the record. Over the next 2 days, I followed their posts quietly. I didn't engage. I just watched, like they once did to me, and I saved everything. One comment caught my eye, from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. I always wondered why she never showed up to things. Now I know. That sentence stayed with me, not because it hurt, but because it proved something I'd suspected all along. People believe the loudest voice, the one who speaks first, the one who controls the edit. But there's always someone watching who remembers what was real. By the end of the week, my folder had grown. Photos, videos, messages. I wasn't stockpiling for vengeance. I was archiving evidence. Because I knew, sooner or later, someone would ask, "What really happened between you and your family?" And I'd have the answer ready. Not a rant, not a scream, just a file. They tried to humiliate me for showing up. I was about to show them what happens when I do. I had watched them rewrite the story for years. Now I had the pen. It was nearly 10 p.m. on a Saturday night. I had just settled into bed with a cup of tea when my phone buzzed. I reached over, half expecting it to be another promotional email or a late-night text from Vera. Instead, it was a notification from Facebook. Callista posted in Family Circle, public page. I opened it without thinking. What I saw made my stomach clench. "Some people create chaos just to feel relevant," her post began. The photo above was a soft-lit shot of her, with her arm around our mother, both of them beaming in front of the fireplace. "When you love peace, Sometimes the hardest choice is blocking blood. She never mentioned me by name. She didn't have to. The comment section lit up almost immediately with heart emojis and "you're so strong" replies. I stared at it, pulse steady. I'd seen this performance before. But this time, I wasn't the one shrinking in the wings. She was responding to my blog post, the one I had published under a pseudonym. I had written it for myself, mostly, a way to name the erasure I'd endured. But it had been picked up by a local community forum for women navigating toxic family systems. From there, it took on a life of its own. Then came the comment that cracked it open. I was at that party, Lumen wrote, her name in bold. Her profile photo still showed her in the backyard of our family home. Once a bridesmaid for Callista, now apparently something else. You didn't treat your sister like family. That wasn't peace. That was performance. Silence. Then it snowballed. Another comment. There's more to this than what you're posting. I've seen the way you talk about her. And another. Funny how the one who did the work always ends up the villain in these stories. The facade was cracking and fast. Screenshots began resurfacing. Ones I hadn't shared, but clearly others had saved too. Group chats, email forwards, even a clipped audio file where Callista mocked my writing voice. One of our cousins, not one I trusted, but one who apparently had a change of conscience, emailed me a screenshot directly. The subject line read, "You should know they're still doing it." In the image, Callista was telling the group I had made up everything in the blog, that I was fragile, jealous, obsessed with playing martyr. My stomach twisted, not at the words, but at the familiarity of them. It was the same script I'd been handed for decades, same adjectives, same deflection. They thought they were controlling the story. They didn't realize people had receipts too. I didn't reply. I didn't rant. Instead, I opened my blog and wrote a single line. When truth makes people uncomfortable, it's because they benefited from the lie. That was it. 2 hours later, Callista messaged me directly. You think this is justice? You're making this worse for everyone, for Mom, for the rest of us. Is that what you wanted? I stared at her words, imagining her fingers typing it out with that same polished urgency she used when negotiating vendor discounts. I typed back, "No, I'm making it honest." Then I went back to my blog and hit the edit button. I removed the pseudonym and signed it. Seraphine. For the first time in years, I wasn't hiding. Let them see. The silence was broken. The reckoning had just begun. I wasn't alone in this anymore, and that made all the difference. The cafe was quiet, save for the low hum of the espresso machine and the occasional clink of porcelain on tile. I sat near the back, facing the door, a habit I picked up long ago after one too many surprises in family meetings. The sun filtered in through old lace curtains, dust dancing in the air like tiny truths waiting to be caught. He walked in right on time. Lumen looked older than I remembered. There was gray in his beard now, and a kind of calm in his posture I hadn't noticed years ago. Still, when his eyes met mine, I saw the same flicker of understanding that made him the only person Callista had ever dated who didn't just echo her version of things. Seraphine, he said gently, sliding into the seat across from me. Didn't think I'd ever hear from you again, I admitted. I read the blog, he said, no hesitation. Every word. He didn't flinch, didn't try to dance around it, just said what needed saying. What you wrote? It was brave, and unfortunately, accurate. I blinked. You knew? I knew enough. More than I wanted to admit back then. I saw how she treated you. I just didn't want to be the guy who called it out in the middle of Sunday dinner. He pulled something from his coat pocket, a folded photograph. I recognized it instantly. An old group shot taken in our backyard before things got ugly. I was in the center, laughing, holding a sparkler. It was the only photo where I remembered feeling like I belonged. He handed it to me. On the back, in neat handwriting, he'd written, "She was always there. They just chose not to see her." For a second, I had to look away. The lump in my throat wasn't sadness. It was relief. "I don't want to make it worse," Lumen said quietly, "but I also don't want you standing out there alone anymore. People need to hear the truth from more than just you." I nodded. No words felt big enough for that kind of offer. So I just folded the photo, slipped it into my bag, and reached across the table to squeeze his hand. It was enough. That night, back in my apartment, I got another message. This one forwarded by Vera. The name lit up like a flare in my inbox. Dina. A second cousin, mostly quiet, always a little too friendly with Callista. I opened it, expecting more damage. Instead, I read, "I defended your sister once. Now I realize I was just helping her rewrite you. I'm sorry. If you ever need someone to testify what she did at that dinner in 2019, I will." I sat there, rereading the message until the words blurred. Not from tears, just from the weight of being seen. Finally, not as dramatic, not as difficult, just as someone who had been telling the truth all along. I opened a new document on my desktop. Title, Witness. Inside, I started compiling everything. Photos, messages, the blog post, now signed. I included Vera's name, Lumen's, Dina's. I listed events by date, added receipts from the house repairs, notes from the hospice calls. It wasn't revenge I was building, it was a record, one no one could twist or bury. Later, as I filed it all away, I whispered to no one in particular. They called me fragile because I didn't scream. But silence isn't weakness, it's storage. The more they spoke, the less I had to defend myself. Truth had allies now. For the first time in weeks, I didn't wake up angry. I woke up free. Monday morning came with its usual sounds. Garbage trucks groaning down the street, a neighbor's dog howling at nothing, and the whistle of the kettle I forgot I left on. But I moved differently that morning. There was a steadiness in my hands as I slipped the manila envelope into my canvas bag. It was thick, sealed, notarized. On the front, I had written in blue ink, "For review, estate materials." By mid-morning, I stood inside the FedEx store. A wall-mounted television played muted news above a shelf of glossy envelopes. I stepped to the counter and handed the envelope over. "Certified, please," I said. The clerk nodded and printed a label. He didn't ask what was inside. No one ever does when the paper is heavy enough to speak for itself. Inside that envelope was the final document they never saw coming. A legal letter officially relinquishing my share of the family home. But with one clause. Effective immediately, the property would be transferred to a Savannah-based nonprofit that provided housing for single mothers. A place where women, often invisible like I had been, could rebuild. This house was built with my hands and my hurt. Let it now shelter those who know both. By noon, the lawyer had emailed the confirmation. The deed was processing. It was done. I didn't announce it. Didn't draft a caption. I just exhaled. Callista, however, found out quickly, and not through me. By early evening, her lawyer contacted mine, blindsided. The property she had considered her stage was no longer hers to claim. Hours later, Callista went live on Instagram, looking polished but tight-jawed, surrounded by awards from her business. "This isn't fair," she said, voice too composed to be calm. "She's trying to ruin what we've built. This was our legacy, our families." But the comments weren't what she expected. "You mean the house she paid for? Funny how family only matters when there's property involved." And then someone quoted my blog. "Justice doesn't knock. Sometimes it mails you back." The algorithm didn't protect her. The story had legs, and now it had readers. Later that night, as I sat with a cup of black coffee in my kitchen, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years. Cynthia B., a local reporter. I answered. "I'm following up on a tip," she said. "About the house. And a hospice bill?" The memory hit like wind through an open window. Years earlier, me at my dining table, scribbling a check for Dad's end-of-life care. A check I never spoke of. A bill no one else offered to pay. Callista had told people she had handled everything. I sent Cynthia the scanned invoice, just one. That was all she needed. Everything I did for that house, and for my father, I told her, was already paid in full. By me. 2 days later, a local radio segment aired, Legacy Theft. When families rewrite the ledger. The conversation was about money, but it wasn't really. It was about power, about how easy it is for someone to brand themselves as the hero when the receipts are buried. Sponsors started pulling out from Callista's business. Quietly, of course. Polite emails, silent phone calls, but the damage was visible. One of her old friends, someone she used to vacation with, messaged me privately. "She once called you a liability," the message read. "Now she's the one hemorrhaging credibility." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. They wanted to shame me for showing up. Now they were ashamed I ever left. That morning, I didn't answer the phone. I packed a bag instead. It had been a week since the fallout. Since the signatures were filed, the deed transferred, and the curated life Callista had polished like brass finally began to tarnish under the heat of attention. But none of them had called. Not Mom. Not any of the cousins. The same silence they had weaponized against me was now lingering, and for the first time, I welcomed it. Silence was no longer the thing I feared. It was finally something I chose. I stood in the middle of my small kitchen, a cup of tea cooling on the counter beside me, as I pulled out an old photo box from the drawer. I hadn't opened it in years. Some pictures stuck together from humidity. Others were bent from being shoved too quickly in haste. I flipped through the snapshots slowly, expecting to feel that familiar ache in my chest, but it didn't come. The memories no longer bled. They were just evidence, not of what I'd lost, but of what I had given. Proof that I had been there, that I had shown up, over and over when no one asked, and certainly when no one thanked me. Each photo became a receipt of presence. And this time, I didn't feel small looking at them. Later that afternoon, I took down a cardboard shoebox from the closet shelf. Inside were letters, dozens of them, unsent. Some written during long nights after arguments, others scrawled in the back seat of my car outside of hospitals or weddings or Thanksgiving dinners, where I'd sat through Callista's speeches in silence. One was to Mom, after Dad passed. I opened it, read it aloud. "I needed you to say something," I had written. "Anything, but you kept quiet, and I kept breaking." Another was to Callista, written the week she claimed the house's restoration as her own legacy. "You rewrote everything, but I still remember the splinters under my fingernails." I took a match and burned them in the kitchen sink, one by one. Not out of spite, but as a ceremony, a letting go. I didn't need an apology anymore. I needed peace. And peace didn't require permission. The next morning, I drove to the old neighborhood. I parked across from the house, now painted a soft blue by the nonprofit that had moved in. The trim was white, the yard a little untidy, but kids were laughing on the porch. A woman stepped out with a stroller, waving to someone across the street. I didn't get out. I just sat there, watching. The swing set had been repaired. Someone had planted rosemary in the garden bed I once tilled by hand. That was the point. It was never supposed to be about recognition. It was about repair. I smiled. Back at home, as the sun dipped low and shadows slid across the hardwood, I checked my voicemail out of curiosity. One message, Callista. "Hope you're satisfied. You've made your point." Her voice sounded tight, not angry, not emotional, just hollow. I didn't listen to it twice. I didn't even save it. I hit delete and watched the notification disappear like a speck of lint blown off a clean table. She was still mad at the version of me she thought I was, the one who begged for inclusion, who lowered her voice and her worth to keep the family whole. But that version of me no longer existed, and the one who replaced her had nothing left to prove. Closure didn't come from them. It came from watching myself walk away. 2 months had passed since the public silence turned into something louder. Not chaos, not vengeance, but truth spoken out loud for the first time. I was living in a smaller apartment now, nothing fancy, But it had tall windows and blank walls I was slowly filling with my own art. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't surrounded by inherited furniture or hand-me-down guilt. It was mine. All of it. That's when the envelope arrived. It wasn't from family. No recognizable handwriting. Just a clean, cream-colored envelope, no return address. I opened it slowly, half expecting another legal curveball from Callista. Instead, it was an invitation, printed on thick, navy cardstock. "We've been following your story," it read, from the Savannah Women's Collective. "Would you consider speaking at our winter gathering?" I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. They told me the party wasn't for me. But here I was, being asked to lead one. The event took place in a converted warehouse space downtown, with string lights, worn brick walls, and a podium made from reclaimed wood. Nothing about it was glamorous, but everything about it was real. I stood before a room full of women, some older, some younger, all of them with stories worn like armor beneath their coats. Survivors of manipulation, of erasure, of smiling through dinners that left bruises no one could see. I didn't name names, I named patterns. "The people who hurt you don't always come with fists," I said, scanning the audience slowly. "Sometimes they show up in matching sweaters and speak fluent passive-aggressive." Laughter, quiet, knowing, rippled through the room. "They'll tell you you're sensitive, dramatic, overthinking it. They'll say you misremembered, that you made it up. And when you stop showing up, they'll say, 'See? She never cared anyway.'" A woman in the front wiped her cheek. I kept going. "You don't have to explain your boundaries. You don't need to justify your distance. Not everyone deserves a seat at your healed table." When I stepped down, they clapped. Not politely, but with that kind of honest rhythm that fills a space. The speech ended up getting posted online. Within days, a feminist publication quoted it under the headline, "Legacy isn't just blood, it's behavior." Meanwhile, Callista's online presence had withered to a trickle. Her business accounts went silent. No more brunch photos or curated smiles. She didn't issue a statement. She didn't have to. The people who once parroted her stories had stopped tagging her. One day, I got a message from Aunt Clara. Yes, that Aunt Clara. "You were right, we just didn't want to admit it." No apology, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like a crack in the concrete. A few weeks later, I walked past the old house. The nonprofit that now owned it had left the exterior mostly unchanged, but there were small differences. Toys on the lawn, a porch swing newly painted, life happening again. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7, stood near the steps with a watering can too big for her hands. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. "You live here?" I asked gently. She shook her head. "My mom does. We moved in after our old house got mold. We love it here." She reached into her pocket and handed me a folded piece of construction paper. "We made cards for people who helped. Mama said you gave us this house." I opened it. Inside was a stick figure family, 4 people and a dog. One figure had curly hair like mine, and a huge smile drawn with a red crayon. "That's you," she said, pointing. And just like that, I cried. Not for what was lost, but for what was finally mine. They tried to write me out. But I learned something important. You don't need to be in someone's picture to have value. You just need to stop handing your camera to people who crop you out. The party wasn't for me, but the ending? That was mine all along.